The European economy is facing a slow agony as it struggles to compete with the US and China. So said none other than former ECB President Mario Draghi in September, pointing to sluggish growth and productivity.
Growth has been slowing down for a long time in Europe, but we've ignored it. Until 2 years ago, we would never have such a conversation as the one we're having today, because things were sort of going well. But now we cannot ignore it any longer. Now conditions have changed. Europe is nowadays stuck in a static industrial structure, populated by mid-technology companies, which are already mature. The problem is not that we lack smart people, and we don't lack certainly good ideas, but there are too many barriers to commercializing innovations and scaling them up in the European Union.
The numbers help show the scale of the gap between Europe and the US. Despite having a larger population, the European Union's GDP sits at around $19 trillion. That's compared to $29 trillion for the US. The Stoxx 600's market cap is about $14 trillion versus over $50 trillion for the S&P 500. One criticism has been that Brussels' aggressive approach to regulation, especially with big technology companies, has held corporate Europe back versus its global rivals. The person at the center of this policy for the past decade is Margrethe Vestager, the EU's former competition commissioner. We spoke to her on her final day as the bloc's top antitrust enforcer.
What that has been sort of my drive in Danish politics, in European politics, was to make sure that everybody has a fair chance of making it. And making sure that the market provides for that the market serves customers. That has been, the trend of these 10 years for me.
It's a mantra that has resulted in some of the toughest rules in the world for big tech. Another way to put it, if you can't beat Silicon Valley at its own game, regulate it. Vestager has overseen some of the EU's most high-profile cases, taking on the world's biggest companies and issuing over 25 billion euros in fines for abuses of dominance and cartel violations.
Today is a big win.
She won a record 13 billion euro tax judgment against Apple and oversaw one of the EU's landmark pieces of regulation, the Digital Markets Act. We asked about her rise from Danish politician to perhaps the most feared name in Silicon Valley.
I don't really know how to prepare for being on the front page of one of the US main papers. It's important to figure out how to go with it.
Fair is fair.
I came, of course, from executive positions in Denmark. I was the deputy prime minister. I had several experiences as a minister. But I think the most important point is that you believe in what you do. That's the cases that we have fought, that they have been fought with great work by the teams with very strong evidence. I think that's the kind of preparedness that you need, that you believe that this is a strong case and you have something valuable to say.
And from her point of view, things have gotten better.
I definitely think that we have made progress. The world was different 10 years ago. How we looked at technology was very different 10 years ago. Nobody was really asking questions to say, is this really fair? Is this a good way to behave in the marketplace? That has changed completely. Now people have much more nuanced views. I think seeing all the good things that comes with technology, but also realizing that we really need to take care, both to make sure that the market remains open, but also that technology is not addictive, is not providing rabbit holes or dark patterns or anything else that may manipulate us as humans in ways that undermine how society works.
But today, Vestager's legacy faces a challenge from those who say regulation has hurt Europe, stopping it from creating massive technology companies to rival the US or China. We put this to Roxanne Vaza, a woman at the very heart of Europe's tech scene.
How would I sum up US versus Europe regulation? Well, I think Europe definitely has the image and the reputation of always wanting to regulate, and they're good at it.
Vaza is the director of Station F, a startup campus in Paris. She's also a scout for Sequoia Capital and an angel investor herself.
And I definitely think regulation does, in some cases, slow things down. It creates complexity. In some cases, it's not even clear when the regulations are first coming out exactly what they apply to and what we need to do to comply with them. So it can be quite difficult to navigate, especially for young, innovative companies that don't have a lot of resources and a lot of time to spend on that kind of thing.
All that, she says, can bring some disadvantages for companies in Europe compared to their rivals in North America.
I think in the US, there's a lot more flexibility. The consumer is potentially less protected because of those discrepancies. But as we mentioned, there's less room for innovators to play with. So I think they're two very different approaches, and I think the European approach will naturally dissuade some types of innovation from happening here.
Margareta Vestager takes a different view.
We're talking a lot these days about competitiveness. The paradox is that you can have competition without having competitiveness, but you cannot have competitiveness without competition. So really important to maintain that strive that everybody should be challenged. If you achieve a very strong market position, it comes with responsibility. So to some degree, I think a lot of people can mirror themselves in what we are asking of market participants in their own lives. If someone is rich and powerful, they have responsibility. If someone is small with very few means, well, they should have a better chance of making it.
This view has informed the flagship technology regulation for the EU and, by extension, much of the world over the past 10 years.
I think it's important here to see, well, some regulation, like the Digital Markets Act, is opening the marketplace. Regulation like the AI Act makes AI safe to use, which means, again, that it opens the market for many more use cases where people may otherwise scare off. So I think it's important to look at regulation and say, okay, that is market creating, that is market opening, that is enabling innovation. And then look at regulation where you have reporting obligations that you may not need, or that implementation have been done in a way that was overly strict, where with new technology or going through things, I would say, why did we do that in such a complicated manner? There are much easier ways to do this. So I think it's really important to do that. And the new Commission has obliged itself to go through the entire body of regulation to weed out the overlaps, what is unnecessary, in order to make life easier for businesses big and small.
Station F's Vaza also says that while regulation can sometimes slow tech innovation, it can also create opportunities. And she's optimistic about the future of Europe's startup culture.
I think it's interesting we don't also talk about the opportunities that some regulations can create. And when I say this, I'm thinking specifically of climate tech, the climate tech industry. I do think that the regulation obviously is causing a lot of headache for some companies that have to comply, but it is also creating a lot more opportunity and a lot more interest for this category in Europe. I would say actually that Europe has made a huge cultural shift, maybe over the last 5 years. If I'm looking specifically at France, 10 years ago, it was definitely not a thing to be an entrepreneur. It was almost considered crazy. Why don't you go get a real job, essentially? But that has 100% changed today, and I think just about everybody wants to be a founder. So I think this cultural shift that we're seeing in France, and the rest of Europe is also catching up with it, has changed a lot of things. And when I actually look at how people build companies in the US and in Europe, I mean, obviously, structurally in Europe, things are very different. It means something very different to build a company. But the cultural, the kind of mindset of entrepreneurs is almost identical. I would say it's actually maybe become even a little bit more balanced recently. I think with AI, we've seen the US having to step in a bit more, deciding to regulate a bit more. Now we'll have to see if that continues with the new presidency.
The EU's tough approach to regulation hasn't always pleased its partners. President Trump notably attacked Vestager, saying she hates the United States, perhaps worse than any person I've ever met. Now she hands over to her successor, Teresa Ribera of Spain, with massive antitrust decisions to take against American companies. Apple, Alphabet's Google, Meta and X, owned by Trump confidant Elon Musk, could face billions in fines or even mandatory divestment orders. We asked Rubera how she hopes to deal with the new administration.
I will try to anticipate cooperative relations in these fields. I think that both American consumers and European consumers, worldwide consumers, do benefit when we pay attention on how the market does work. And I was said, and this is quite clear, that before, in the previous Trump mandate, there was also some involvement, relevant involvement and coordination between the competition policies and decisions between the two authorities. So I hope that we can work together.
As for Vestia, she may be backing away from the front lines of antitrust enforcement, but she's hardly fading away.
Well, what the future brings, I don't know. What I know is that I bought myself a domain, which is .eu. Because it may be that the European Commission is done with me, but I'm so not done with Europe.